Good evening, everybody. I hope you're doing well. It's good to see you. As I said last night, I would appreciate it if you would like and share, and if you would comment so that I know who all's on here, because I don't get the, on this one that I'm on, I don't get the little notification of who's on here with me. I can see that there's 8 people, but that's all I can see. So if you would comment, I see John and Sharon and Jennifer. It's good to see y'all. Hope y'all are doing well. Hope you're surviving in the coronavirus world in which we live. Michelle, hi. Hope you're doing well. Does everybody get groceries? I'm about to, after I'm done with this, I'm going to head out into the great unknown and attempt to see if I can hunt down some groceries. We will see how that goes. I did want to announce that last night we had the giveaway. We had about 9 or 10, no, I think it was 12 people share, and so I put those 12 names in our randomizer, and for this t-shirt giveaway, because I got about 15 of these things to give away. So just wanted to announce that Dallas Green was the winner of last night's t-shirt giveaway, and if you will share in the next 24 hours, then I will give whoever, we'll pick another random name tomorrow, and we will give that one away as well. So Dallas, if you see this, just send me a private message and let me know what your address is, or we'll figure out a time when we can get together and I can get that to you. I'll also send you a message in case you don't get to see this. Oh, Michelle, I hope you don't eat your dog. I did see the video of the Wuhan market that's going around with all the dogs in cages and on tables and everything else. Please don't resort to that just yet. Hopefully we will get through this. So what we want to do is continue what we started a couple nights ago. This past Tuesday we started looking at the book of Colossians. And one of the reasons why I said was because Colossians is a book that exalts Jesus and gives us this big picture of Jesus and of who he is and of what he's done and what he's accomplished. And if we need anything in this time that we're living in, it is a bigger vision of Jesus. We need to see Jesus more clearly. We need to be drawn to him. We need to believe in him and put our faith in him. And the more we see him and understand him and know about him, the more we're going to be willing to put our faith in him. So what we want to do tonight is just continue where we left off. We left off in Colossians chapter 1, verse 8. We are going to start with verse 9, and we are going to work our way down through verse 12. And I got something I'm going to try tonight that I've not tried before. I've got this little pen, and I have actually a touchscreen monitor, and so I was getting annoyed with my mouse because every time I tried to highlight anything or point to things, it would bring up this little menu, and it was blocking stuff. So with this, we're going to see how this goes with me actually writing on the screen, so you'll be able to see as we work through this. I'm going to start with verse 9. We're going to read down through verse 12. And then I just want to share with you a couple of thoughts from these 4 verses. Look at what Paul says. He says, "For this reason also, since the day we heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience, joyously giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light." Michelle, don't eat Dave either. Don't eat either one of them. Hopefully we'll be able to get some actual food before long. I actually went to Wendy's last night at about 11 o'clock, and they were open. So if you're hungry, you can still go get takeout from Wendy's or McDonald's or wherever. All right, so let's look at this. There's a couple of words, if you'll notice, that come up again and again and again. Paul says at the very beginning, "For this reason also." Now, if you'll go back, you'll find that he is expressing thanks for what God has done in the lives of the Colossians. And this is what we talked about on Tuesday, that he was thankful for their faith and their hope and their love. And so he says, for this reason also, because he's seen their faith and hope and love, he's heard about it at least. He's never actually met these people, but he tells us earlier in the chapter that he's heard about their faith, hope, and love. For this reason also, since the day we heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be. Now, I want to just stop there, and I want to make a note of something, that we see Paul's heart for these people. Let's see. That he says, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask. And so we have two words here that are both used to express Paul's heart for the people, these Colossian Christians, that he has not ceased to pray. Just think about that for a minute, that this is a constant thing for Paul, that they are always on his mind. You may have some things that are always on your mind right now. They may come to you naturally. I think a lot of times negative things come to us naturally without us trying to think about them. Worries and doubts and fears, these things come to us naturally. But for us to pray without ceasing, for us to say, I have not ceased to pray for you, and to ask that you may be filled, requires intention. Our prayer life is not something that's going to come naturally. And that's true whether things are going well or when things are going poorly. When things are going well, we'll be tempted to put off our prayer life because we'll just not be thinking about it. I mean, we'll be too busy enjoying life, enjoying the things that we've received, the blessings from God, etc. And when things are going poorly, we'll be so worried and overcome with anxiety that we won't think to pray because we're going to be so caught up in thinking about all the what ifs and the danger and everything else. And so it takes intention for us to stop and to pray. And it takes intention for us to be willing and able to say that we've not ceased to pray for someone or for something, or, and to ask God to work in this situation. I would encourage you, as we face all that we're facing right now and with everything that's going on, the greatest thing we could do is to seek the Lord in prayer, is to be it said of us that we've not ceased to pray, and to ask God for Him to intervene and intercede in the situation that we as individuals and as a nation are in. So this is significant. It's significant that Paul lived a life of prayer, and he calls us, and Christ calls us more importantly, to live a life of prayer. Now notice what he asks for these Colossian believers. You see, Paul knows the problem with the church at Colossae. And the problem at this church is that they have got false teachers who have come in and are teaching things that are not true, are not accurate, are not right about who God is, and more importantly about who Christ is, and about what is what Christians are responsible for, what they should be doing, how they should be living. There's false teaching going on. So what's Paul's number one prayer? Well, it makes sense. And notice what he does here. In fact, I'm going to change the color here, because we see kind of a repetition going on. He says that you may be filled with all knowledge of His will, in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. All of these are words that have to do with our mind, right? With the way that we think. And so what Paul is asking for is for God to begin to cultivate a certain kind of mind in these believers, that they will have increased knowledge, that they will have increased wisdom, and that they will have increased understanding. And in particular, and this is going to come back here in a minute, but in particular, he's got one thing in mind. He wants knowledge of God's will. God's will. What we need during crises and during panic is not just knowledge in general. You can get online and you can get a lot of knowledge, and it's going to drive you insane. If you're constantly checking the latest stats on what's going wrong with the world, if you're constantly looking at news websites, if you're constantly on Facebook or wherever, and you're getting knowledge, it can really cause you to feel discouraged and depressed and anxious and filled with fear and everything else. So it's not just knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that we need. It's a particular kind. We need knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of God's will. Whoops. All right, I took that away. Whoa, I don't know what happened there. Let's see if we can fix that. So, we need knowledge of His will. And then notice what else he says. In all spiritual in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. Now, it's worth noting here, in the New American Standard, it just applies this to wisdom. It sounds like that he's asking for all spiritual wisdom and then understanding. But what this word here is actually describing is both the word for understanding and the word for wisdom. So we don't just need knowledge wisdom and understanding, we need knowledge of God's will, knowledge of God, and we also need wisdom and understanding that is spiritual in nature. Not the wisdom and understanding that comes from this world, but the wisdom and understanding that comes from God, that has a bigger perspective than what our world has. Because our world has this very narrow field of view, this very narrow, limited range of sight. And what Christ is calling us to is to recognize the big picture of what God is doing in the world, and to come and seek knowledge of his will, of who God is, and what God he's wanting. And then Paul tells us that all of this, as we gain knowledge of God's will, and as we gain spiritual wisdom and understanding, something's going to take place in our lives. What is it? Well, he lets us know in this very next section, that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Paul says that as a result of this knowledge, as you gain knowledge, as you gain wisdom and understanding of who God is, and how do we get this? Well, we get it by getting into his word, by studying. We get it by meditating on his word, and by reading it, and by spending time with him in prayer. I mean, this is how we're gaining knowledge. Over in James, James says that if we want wisdom, we need to ask God for it. And so how do we get these things? Well, we get it by spending time with God. And so he tells us, if we will do that, what's going to be the result? That we will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. And then he gives us another part, that we're going to please him in all respects. And then he says that we are going to bear fruit in every good work. So he says, as we gain our knowledge, as we gain wisdom and understanding these things, knowledge of God, wisdom and understanding that's spiritual, it's going to change the way we live. It's going to change the way that we walk. And when it uses the word walk, it's just talking about every aspect of our lives, from the way that we talk, to our attitudes, to the things that we are doing, our actions, our countenance. I mean, everything about us. Our knowledge, the knowledge of God and wisdom and understanding that's spiritual, will begin to change our whole manner of life, so that we begin to please him in all respects, and so that we bear good fruit. It reminds me a little bit of what he says over in Ephesians. You may remember when we started this, I asked the question, what was the sister letter to the book of Colossians? And the sister letter, the one that kind of connects to it very closely, is the book of Ephesians. And in Ephesians, Paul says that God has created us with a purpose, and that purpose is for good works. He repeats the same idea right here, where he says that as we gain our knowledge of God, our wisdom and understanding that's spiritual, that we are going to begin to bear fruit in every good work. And then notice what Paul does. He comes back to this whole issue of increasing in the knowledge of God. And so we have this sort of cyclical thing that takes place, that we grow in knowledge and wisdom and understanding, and as we do that, it begins to change the way that we live and the way that we speak and our attitudes and on and on. And as that begins to change, we begin to see God more clearly. We begin to grow in our knowledge of him. And then that changes our lives even more, refines us. It refines our actions and our words. And then as that refinement takes place with our actions, then our knowledge of God begins to grow. And we have this process, this sort of cyclical process of feeding into one another, our knowledge and wisdom and understanding, feeding into our lives and changing our lives. And then the more that our lives change, the more that we experience God in our lives, the more we come to know him better. And as we know him better, our lives are changed more, and it continues and continues. And look, this is what we would call that process of sanctification. This is how we are transformed. This is why Paul's able to say over in Romans, in Romans 12, to not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Even over there in Romans 12, Paul is saying that as our minds are transformed, as we begin to think differently, everything else will change. So this is kind of the picture Paul is painting in these first few verses, is he's praying for the Colossian believers that they will continue to know God better, and as they know God better, their lives would change, and as their lives change, they would begin to know God even more. Then he prays for this next part, that you would be, that you would be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for the attaining of all, and then this is significant here, steadfastness and patience. He says that as this takes place in your life, and as you grow in knowledge, and then your life begins to change, your actions and words and attitudes, and then you grow in knowledge, as this is taking place, this sort of cycle, that you're going to be strengthened through the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's going to begin to work in your heart and in your life, and He's going to begin changing the way that you approach situations and problems, problematic people, and problematic situations. And in fact, these are what these two words refer to. In N.T. Wright's commentary of the book of Colossians, he notes, and it makes sense here, that the word for steadfast is referring to, and I don't know if I can write this, situations. That we are steadfast under circumstances or under problematic situations. So when we're going through problems, when we're going through not being able to find bread, it is steadfastness that gets us through. It's steadfastness that keeps us steady, keeps us going, keeps us persevering, doesn't allow us to give up. Patience, on the other hand, refers to people. And so we have steadfastness in the midst of circumstances, and we have patience with problematic people. And what Paul is saying is we need both of these things, because in our lives there's going to be times when we face problematic circumstances and we need that steadfastness that'll keep us going. And then there's going to be times when we face problematic people, and in those situations we need patience for us to keep going and not to, act in ways that are unholy or that are unsanctified or that don't please Him in every respect, that aren't worthy of the Lord, that aren't born out of good fruit. So this is something that God is cultivating and creating in us, is steadfastness and patience. And if you want steadfastness and patience, the best thing you can do and I can do is to go back to the root and grow in knowledge of God. This is why we're doing this. This is why we're here tonight studying Colossians, because we want to grow in our knowledge of His will for us so that it will begin to change our lives. And as it changes our lives, we will begin to be changed from the inside out, and we'll have steadfastness and patience that we didn't have before. Now, here's another interesting thing, a little part that I think is kind of cool. Paul says right here, he gives us this word, joyously. Now, in the New American Standard, it says joyfully giving thanks, as if joyously goes with giving thanks. If you look at the King James, you'll find that it says, for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience with joy. In other words, it puts joyously with steadfastness and patience. Here's the reason why. Because this joyously word is ambiguous. It can go with either side. Paul could either be saying that as we endure things, as we gain that steadfastness and patience in our lives, that we are doing that joyously. In other words, we're not steadfast and patient with a sad look on our faces and looking down and I guess I'll persevere. I guess I'll be patient with this person. Or through gritted teeth, if I have to be patient with them, I will. No, what Paul's saying is that this steadfastness and patience that the Holy Spirit builds in our lives, this supernatural thing, it actually allows us to be steadfast and patient with joy. So that we are persevering with problematic situations and problematic people, but we're doing it with joy. Why? Because we know who's in charge. We know that our situation and the people that may surround us and cause problems for us, they don't have the final say. We have a God who has the final say. And because of that, we can face problematic situations and people with joy. But that's not all. This also goes with the next part where he says giving thanks to the Father. And so we are giving thanks, again, not begrudgingly or because, well, I guess I ought to give thanks, because God's provided this. But no, we have a joy that allows us to then give thanks to the Father. So it is creating within us a particular kind of attitude where we have joy and where we're able to endure bad situations and good situations, and we're able to do it with joy, and we're able to do it giving thanks to God, who has, as Paul says here, qualified us, or empowered us, you might say, to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. Right after this, and we'll look at this tomorrow night, but right after this, Paul talks about how Christ has transferred us from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of God's beloved Son. And so I think that's what he's referencing there when he says that we're sharing in the inheritance of the saints in light. That God has shined a light on us. He's helped us to see in a way that we've never seen before. He helps us to see situations around us like we've never seen before. He helps us to see the people around us like we've never seen before. And it all begins with a healthy and robust knowledge of God. Whoops. That's where it all begins. The more we know God, the more we know about him, the more we know of his will, the more we'll find all of these other things growing in our lives. The more we'll begin to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. The more that we will please him in all respects. The more that we will bear fruit in every good work. The more that we will increase in that knowledge. The more that we will be strengthened with all power. The more that we will be attaining steadfastness and patience. The more joyful we will become. The more thanks we will give to God, because we will recognize just who he is and just what he's done. He is a good and faithful God. I want to close tonight with a quote that I posted on Facebook earlier today from this commentary by N.T. Wright, who happens to be one of my favorite theologians, favorite biblical scholars. Listen to what he says. He says, and I'm just going to go back a little bit to read a little bit more than what I posted. It says, God is accomplishing this productive and growing Christian character in his people so that they are strengthened with all power according to his glorious might. God is regularly seen in the Old Testament as the powerful God, the sovereign creator who rescued Israel from Egypt. That power, unleashed through the gospel, is now continually at work in God's people to give them great endurance and patience. Paul singles out these qualities as the weapons one needs to live in the world, undaunted by its crises and panics. A patient and long-suffering spirit, the quiet corollary of faith, hope, and love, is the product of the settled conviction that the Father of Jesus Christ is the sovereign Lord of the world, and that he is able to bring about his purposes in his own time and manner. There is a slight distinction to be drawn between endurance and patience. The former is what faith, hope, and love bring to an apparently impossible situation. The latter, what they show to an apparently impossible person. Verse 11 contributes to the total prayer the insights that growth in the knowledge of God and in holiness is an uphill battle, and that strength for this battle can only come, but will surely come, from the power of God himself. That is my encouragement to you tonight. We have a God who desires to see you grow in faith, hope, love, and in his Spirit. He desires for you to grow spiritually and for you to be transformed more and more into the image of his beloved Son. But it takes us meeting with him. And there has never been a time better, in my lifetime at least, that's been appropriate and good for meeting with God. Right now, for many of us, we don't have a lot of places to go. Everything's been put on hold. There are no football games or basketball games or baseball games. Everything is shut down. Right now, we have an opportunity to seek God like never before and to grow in faith, hope, love, and in the power of his Spirit. But in order to do that, we've got to get down into the Word and into his presence through prayer and through fasting. We've got to wrestle with him, and we've got to come to know him in a greater way. And as we do that, he's going to build the things that we most need in our lives. I want to encourage you this evening. I know there's a lot of bad news out there, but we got some good news. In fact, we've got the best news of all time right here. And this is an opportunity for us. It's an opportunity for us to share the gospel in ways we never have done before, maybe never thought of doing before. And yet God is at work in the world. Don't be discouraged. Don't fear. We have a God who is in control, who is sovereign, and who is bringing all things to his glorious conclusion. And I pray that every one of us will be a part of that great conclusion that he is bringing us towards. Real quick, I just want to remind you one more time, Dallas Green was the one who won this shirt last night. If you share this video, then you'll be entered in a drawing, and you may win one tomorrow night. I'll let you know. We will give any announcements as they come. I pray that you're all doing well, that you have everything you need. If you need anything, give me a call or message me, and the church will see what we can do to meet those needs. God bless you, and we will see you tomorrow night at the same time, 6 o'clock.